Hey everybody, welcome to the Jeff and Casey Show.
Hello and welcome to the Jeff and Casey Show.
This is another topic in which I don't know what we're going to talk about yet. Casey's been doing the gathering of information.
Yeah, you know, I feel like between the two of us, I am the one who tends to be a little more rigorous in his own head.
Oh, okay.
Right? We're both usually not correct. You know?
Well, I think the problem is
we get confused, it's true.
I
but in my head, I believe I know what I'm
something
talking
like podcast and send it to you, and then that's the last time I think about it. I should probably search the podcast before we begin. Probably.
But you're not even organized to do that.
Yeah, that's true.
So this was a topic that I thought was totally worth talking about, even just from a practical standpoint. Like, this is something that someone needs to actually put out there.
Okay.
And I feel like we could do a good job of laying the groundwork for it. For a compendium of this sort, or of what actually needs to happen by hashing it out in the podcast once, just to see where we land.
Okay.
This is motivated by the fact that recently as I'm sure you've seen, the Ouya, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, the Ouya console that was on Kickstarter.
The Android-based.
It's a little cube that you can play. It's Tegra 3. It's a Tegra 3 inside a cube with a controller. That is what it is, right? And it's $99. You can go buy them now. They're out. They're fulfilling orders now or whatever. Right. So
wait, you can buy them? I didn't know that. They're done?
Yes, they are actively shipping to the pre-order people right now. Okay. So you can order and it'll be, you know, I don't know if it's a month or... they're not quite at the time when they've got surplus. Right. Because they're just started filling the orders of all the people who are on Kickstarter who are with them.
How much are they?
$99.
Okay.
I don't... Yeah. I'm not an Ouya spokesperson. I don't know. I think it's $99 for a console.
I feel like
it doesn't matter.
We should...
It's irrelevant.
Assuming what we're going to talk about is anything like we normally talk about, it'll be clear that we're not Ouya spokesperson by the time we're done. But
no, that's not true. Right. I am not here to bash the Ouya at all.
Right. Okay.
Right. So I looked at that, and so one of the things that obviously, if anyone who follows the podcast know, especially with our very first video podcast, I was like, console and PC people, it's a disaster. Like, we are letting our future be determined by people who don't have our best interest in mind, who are interested in doing nothing but extracting money from us, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? I said a lot of very negative things, all of which I totally stand behind, as a part of like Windows and all these sort of things that are happening. So the Ouya is a little bit interesting because they were at least sort of purporting to be like an open platform, right? And so like one of the things that
there's still a store though.
So and I don't necessarily want to go into that part of it quite yet, because I think that remains to be seen what actually happens when that turns out. But one of the things they said was like they're not trying to prohibit people from, say, just wiping the BIOS, like wiping the installed system and just like taking over the box. It's like, hey, so the things that you might do with like a PlayStation where it's like, oh, I just put Linux on this or something that Sony then like cracked down on and all those sorts of things. Like, they're actually saying no. It's like, if you just want to use this as a computing device that you just think you can. Right. And to me, that's like a positive step. Again, I don't necessarily think, based on some of the stuff I've heard from Ouya, that it's like, this is the be all and end all, great company, whatever. But that was a positive, right?
Okay.
So I'm interested to see what they do with this. So I wanted to see what's going on. I download their SDK. And in the SDK, I find that it's basically all Java. It's just Java, right? It's an SDK. Which makes sense because it's an Android device, and with absent the NDK, which is the way that you can program Java natively for certain Android platforms. Absent the NDK, that is what an Android device is. It is a Java device. The OS interfaces with you in Java. Even if you did write native code, you have to have like a layer there and that sort of stuff, right? So this bothers me because I feel like there is an overwhelming trend in all of the spaces besides the hardest core game enclaves, like Xbox, PlayStation, like that kind of level. There is an overwhelming trend towards people not appreciating the need for native code and people overestimating the value of intermediate layers. Right. And so what I wanted to do was kind of have a podcast where we explain to people who may not know why these are true,
right,
or who may think they know and disagree and have not heard good arguments to the contrary,
right,
about why these things are bad. And we've seen it a couple times now. The first Windows Phone, when they shipped that, and I don't know if they've fixed that by now. They were claiming they were going to fix it.
Windows 8 but phones, I think
you can do native. Okay, so the original Windows,
I have a funny story about that. But
okay,
continue.
So Windows Phone 7
right,
and that sort of stuff shipped out of the gate, no ability to do native. Android phone shipped out of the gate, native, no ability to do native. Came along with the NDK. It's only a partial solution.
Right.
It's like it's still Java on the other end, but it's about
it's a nightmare, but
right,
yes,
it's a bit of a nightmare. And so now we've got the Ouya shipping, which is ostensibly a game console, which if you normally think of game console, you think performance is important because latency and the frame rate and these sorts of things are very important to the experience of playing a huge section of the types of games that there are out there currently. You'd think that would really care about things like performance. Nope, it's what they ship to developers was Java only, basically. I post on Twitter, hey, where's the native code stuff? I've posted it multiple times now. No answer from them or anyone else, right? And so I feel like this trend is disturbing, and I'd like to just kind of talk about why it's important that we stop thinking this way.
Right. I think there's a whole bunch there to unpack, too.
Yeah.
And there's a whole bunch of incorrect engineering assumptions all the way up and down that stack.
I believe so as well.
So we can start anywhere. But I'd prefer to start with the fact, the fallacy of people always saying, if you JIT code, it's going to be just as fast as native. Okay. And someday the JITs are going to be that good.
Which, by the way, is the same argument you almost always hear from garbage collection people that are like, either it's already good enough. Right. Look at this example where we instrumented someone's often Java code, which makes it even more hilarious. Where we instrumented something to determine how fast it would or wouldn't be, and then or they say, well, it's not there yet, but it will get there. Eventually, it will get there.
The one I get mostly with garbage collection proponents are, if it's not fast enough, it's because you're doing it wrong.
Really?
And then they say, I don't
hear that one.
Yeah, I hear that one all the time.
Wow,
and they're like, the way you do this,
yeah.
And they have a whole series of you pre-allocate the arrays, you do this. So the idea is you architect your system as much as possible so you don't hit the garbage collector. And I'm like, that means there's no point.
Not only
are you manually effectively doing the memory management, just like you did before.
Right.
But you also have this cliff when you fuck up. Right.
So
it's the worst of both worlds.
Yes.
And again, 99% of the time, these people are programming in a way that makes that unnecessary. There are some things like, hey, enclosure-heavy languages, things like that, where you're doing lots of small allocations and currying values and all that around. Hey, there's some places where garbage collection allows you to think about code in a slightly different way that might have an advantage. 99% of the time, you're in Objective-C or Java or whatever, which is not that way. Very rarely do you get the win of doing that. You just get the loss and you get the stuff. And none of these people, all of these people are ending up thinking about these things in terms of them as a user of the garbage collection. Right. And so I have a hard time with that since at RAD we have a garbage collected thing when we had to do Iggy, the Flash-based system, which uses Actionscript, which is basically a slightly weird superset of JavaScript.
Right. It's an ECMA derivative,
yes.
Right? Yeah. Actionscript 3 is. 2 was not, right? 2 is a separate thing, and 3 is
the full.
They switched to JavaScript, I believe, but yes.
So anyway, we have experience with this.
Right. Because that language is spec'd to have a garbage collector, so if you're implementing it, you have to have a garbage collector.
And if you can think about a large language or a browser or something like that, where you're writing one of these big sprawling garbage collectors, a lot of people are going to work on it. And it's going to be this thing where hey, when you have something that's complicated, that's performance dependent, things can fall through the cracks.
Yes.
Okay. At RAD, we have Sean, who wrote the whole goddamn thing himself.
Yes.
So it's in his head. And even then, it's at the edge of what you can hold in your head.
Okay.
But he's aware of all the trade-offs.
Right, yes.
Right. Yeah. And even with that, and also being a very optimized, to the point of do things that you wouldn't do if you were trying to make the most stable, most robust code. Like there's a lot of stuff we do to avoid things going through the garbage collector. There's huge chunks of the Actionscript language. The Actionscript language, the Actionscript environment that we try to like broker through these kind of friend classes that don't go through the garbage collector. All this, it's a fucking disaster.
Yeah.
And that's with a very good optimized one, which one person has in his brain at any one time. So you can imagine something big. It's not going to be like no one knows how they work, right? Especially, I mean, even then, like it's complicated algorithms like garbage collection, like things that walk lots of links and all that. You ostensibly know how they work, right? You know, I walk this thing and I color graph, and then the things that don't have the color are the islands, and then we delete them.
But you failed to think of cases X, Y, and Z that happen rarely, and
then you are taking a complicated thing and squishing it down into like we're coloring this algorithm and like it's a we made that into a simple, and that's a very complicated task. So it's my opinion that even when you have one person, there are still lots of surprises in there. And we don't have good ways to think about things or even great ways to visualize what's going on a lot of the time. Even to the point where when Sean put in dot support so we could like draw out with the garbage collector, it's still surprising. You're like, wow, there's like
it's like
10,000 things in an empty Swift, and you're like, so in my opinion, it's really hard for me to have a conversation with the proponents of that in the sense that we make this, we use one, we are not a user of, we make this, and we don't have. It is in Rad's best interest to say that garbage collection is awesome because it's part of Iggy. It's not. It is not. It is a terrible thing. And you very rarely get the win that you're supposed to. It's just one of those things that lets you write code sloppy and not being careful.
It's an excuse to write it sloppy,
And you will almost always have to end up fixing that later on, whether the whether the memory management part of it was the problem or not. You will have to fix that code. So you might as well be somewhat enforced in writing it well in the first place, because you can't really, if you really architect your whole thing knowing garbage collection is around, you don't think about, hey, the cache effects of these things. You're just doing these, and that's not something you think about till you're at the end of a project. And we've talked before about how I think most programmers try to be super effective at the beginning of a project at the expense of the end. And all programmers have time at the beginning of the project. They have none at the end. So they make that mistake over and over and over, and I'm guilty of it too. But it is something that people need to think about of, do you want systems that fail in very opaque ways late in the project? If you have a system, garbage collection is definitely one like that. And I would say, when we can go on to the scripting part separately, which I think is also true, is you're really putting yourself under pressure at the point where you would want the least pressure, because there's other shit that's going to go wrong too.
Well, so for garbage collection,
so we can. I mean, as a vendor of something that sells garbage collection, I think it's 100% bad. And then, like, if we had, it's in particular for the procedural imperative kinds of languages that we have now, for something, when you go to highly pure functional languages, there probably is some wins there because you can do a lot of calculus on the code and like shrink things down to, but that's not what we write in. And if the reality is these are the things this is the kinds of languages we program in, putting a garbage collector on them and then having to manage the garbage collector is
insane.
Just wrong. It's just period wrong. There's no debating that. There's no getting to the point where that's going to be a win, because I can give you examples of very common usages that have failed.
So here's the thing that I would say about the garbage collector on a meta level, right? Because you're actually talking about practical problems with garbage collection, which I think are all actually totally true. But I think there's a meta problem with garbage collection, which is that for any given program, there is an optimal way to manage the memory for that program. I mean, that's just a given. It's like, at some level, we can say that, if you had the magic oracle, that you could say, is there any way to get more efficient at managing the members of this program? And it says, no, you've hit like some maximally efficient state, right? Whatever that thing is, you could just implement in the program, right? Mm-hmm. Meaning, we know that you can, it's a computer, it can only run the things we code on it. So whatever that thing is, you could have implemented that thing, right? So garbage collection, at best, could only be that thing that you implement. Mm-hmm. And everything beyond that is just it getting worse, right? In other words, everything that it could be that isn't that optimal thing is adding cruft to your program. Okay. It's the cycles you didn't need to spend, it's memory overhead you didn't need to spend, et cetera, et cetera. So I think the question that I usually ask about garbage collection is, for all this code that I am writing, is a garbage collector more likely to hit near that point than what I will have time to write myself in this code? Right. Because that's really the trade-off that we're making here. It's like, can the garbage collector get me as close to that as I would have had to spend, as whatever time I could allocate on this project? Because obviously it's all about time. If a garbage collector doesn't, does a good enough job, but saves me 6 months of time somehow, mm-hmm. right? Then obviously, I'm more persuaded by that argument that maybe I should start using this garbage collector mm-hmm. or whatever it is. But the truth of the matter is, I spend almost no programming time on memory management. Yeah. I mean, I guess maybe if you're not a career programmer, like maybe you've only been programming for 5 years, 10 years, I don't know, I've been programming a long time, admittedly. Maybe if you don't really get memory management, then it's like, well, this saves a huge chunk of time. I don't spend any time managing memory. That's not like a thing that I do, right? So I don't really think about that. And the efficiency that I tend to get in memory management is usually massive. Like, I tend to be like, I allocate a bunch of things at the beginning of a program, and the number of allocations I have per frame is sometimes 0, sometimes it's like 2 or 3, mm-hmm. Or something like this, right? So it's the amount of memory overhead that I have in a typical project that I'm doing is very, very, very small, right? It's super tiny. So garbage collection doesn't even seem to approach, like, I can't even see the meta argument for it. It's like, you're taking something, I'm telling you that if I'm going to go come program for whatever your thing is, I can get, for very little work, I can get essentially no overhead for memory management. And you're telling me that you're going to add this whole system with an unpredictable set of code that I would have to, like, understand how it works.
And that we have very little visibility into. Even the guys that write it, honestly, are I feel like don't really
And sometimes you're not necessarily even going to give me tools to visualize or any of that stuff. And you're telling me that I should just trust that it will do as good as essentially 0% overhead for my entire project, which is what I know that I can achieve. And I'm like, that's insane. I know this isn't true. Like, I've seen how these garbage collectors are implemented. I understand how they work. They are way less efficient than what I do by default on a daily basis with no effort, really. No, not even any thought. And sometimes I've done some pretty creative memory management things, for different, styles of stuff. And maybe we could have a talk about whether the garbage collector ends up doing as good as those, and whether the time I spent on those was time. But that's not the common case, right? The common case is it's very simple what you actually need to do in a game engine in terms of the memory management. And I think, so in terms of that, it's like, if you come to me and you say, our platform required, like, you have to use memory management, immediately I'm like, you don't obviously understand the way I write code at all. And I think there's a fair number of people who write code like I do in the game industry. I'm not uncommon.
Yeah, I feel like games are a little unique in that way. But I also don't, I think there's nothing special about other code that doesn't make it not that either, right? Mm-hmm. Again, like, I just don't think like, the common things are, oh, hey, it's just easier to write code like that, because especially for tools. Hey, I've got a solution for you. I've got 32 gigabytes in my machine. Don't free any memory.
But tools,
it's just like silly, right? But I mean, that's one that comes up a lot. It's so easy with strings. I'm like, I got an idea. Just malloc every time you need a string. That's it. Don't call free ever. And you know what? You're not going to use 32 gigabytes operating on the strings in this text file. I promise.
Well, most of the things...
But again, and the other thing I would say about, like, optimal memory management and not is... Well, I'll say a couple things. One is, if the garbage collector matches up with the optimal use
Right.
then you're great.
Right.
If it doesn't,
Right.
you're fucked because you can't go reprogram the memory.
Right. There's no way you can get any
Right.
closer. Right. Yeah.
In when you're just doing it yourself,
Right.
which is not that much more complicated in
Right.
my opinion, it never has been for me before.
I have not found it to be true yet.
Then the opposite holds, in which you can actually go, oh, we're getting fucked on too much memory use, or we're getting fucked on the sense that we're really thrashing the cache,
Yeah.
and you can make it one person's job just to go change that.
Right. Yes.
You can do it
because you can
It's
see all the
possible.
code, you know exactly
Yes,
what's going
and
on. You don't have to understand someone else's system to fix it.
Right. And there's a lot of stuff
It inserts. I guess the better way to say it is it inserts a black box into your process.
Yeah.
Basically, it inserts something that you will have to decrip and understand in order to
Right.
achieve performance, which
And
you
well, I
never
would-
want.
again, and I
you
would just
never
say-
ever want that. Right?
I would say one thing about that is I don't think it's even a performance question for me. Yes, that's there, and yes, that has a point to it.
Yeah.
I really don't think it wins. It only can possibly lose, and maybe it doesn't lose for you, and great. But
Right.
don't try to tell me that a system that
Right.
can lose is better than a system that I can fix. Because
Right,
I
right.
can't. If your garbage collector fucks me,
Right.
I can't do anything
Right.
about it.
And I think
So-
that sort of hits at the core thing, again, which is that, so an argument about garbage collection, right, is something you can have, and we can have people on either side say, here's why garbage collection is stupid, and here's someone else says, here's why garbage collection is smart. But there's one thing that we can't have an argument about, and that is whether or not there's a lot of argument about whether garbage collection is.
Right.
We know for a fact, it is an objective truth, that there is a lot of argument among programmers about whether or not there should be a garbage collector, right? So if you are shipping a system that requires a garbage collection, you know immediately you are alienating a large portion,
Some portion of those developers.
very serious programmers who care enough about programming that they will take time to argue
Right.
about how memory is allocated. Why would you do that?
Right.
Because a garbage collector is something you can just ship as a side thing.
Yep.
You don't
here's your
ever
library for
design
that.
a language
Yeah.
that requires garbage collection. Design a language where you can say if you want garbage collection, because then the people who do think it's okay can turn it on, and the people
Or
who
write
don't
their own.
don't.
Right? Yeah.
Right? There's absolutely no reason to ever ship a language that requires garbage collection for features in the language that do not need it.
Right.
Now, if you have a language feature that requires garbage collection and you want to say, if you choose to use this feature, it must go through the garbage collector,
Right.
I don't think anyone's going to complain about
Right,
that.
and I think the standard things are, there are some ways to write algorithms in the presence of garbage collection where you can rely on the fact that it's running there and then possibly get some acceleration. Like there's
Right.
copy on write semantics, things like that you can get some win out of. Again,
I would argue
think-
those have nothing to do with garbage collection.
Well, I would just say all those things end up being just more complexity on top of something that's already complex, and you will not be able to understand really what your code's
Right, but-
doing. And then
But copy on write has nothing to do with garbage collection.
I'm just
that
saying-
is an OS, like, that is if you have control of the memory system.
No, I mean, I'm not saying
So-
that kind. I'm saying the
Okay.
kind where, I mean, garbage collection does this a lot, where they're like taking pointers, silent pointers to things, and then like if you change them, like you can go crazy when the garbage collector is controlling all the memory,
Right.
and you know where all the links are. You can go as nutso as you want on that stuff. Again, my argument is that's putting complexity in the wrong place.
Yeah.
It's putting complexity in a place where you're not going to be able to visualize, and you're going to end up being fucked by it because somebody's going to use it differently. And I think code's hard. Code's complicated, right? Anytime you actually graph code, whether it's in telemetry, whether it's in the kind of
You're
things
like,
where
"Wow."
well, even when we grab a frame
Yeah.
of a game,
Right.
with all of our capture
Yeah.
tools that we did for Larrabee,
Yeah.
we capture those, and you're like, oh my god! And just graphing out the
Right.
dependency tree of a single frame, just of the graphic subsystem,
Right.
it was surprising. Like I remember we did this for Braid. Braid is a
Right.
2D game.
Right.
We graphed it out, and then there was one place in there that Sean looked at, and he had shrunk one of the light buffer. I think it was a light buffer. Anyway, it was one of the render targets was half height, but not half width. And he was like, "Oh shit, that's just broken." And then later on, he went, "No, that was intentional." But like,
Right, because you can't remember.
but you can't. And
Right?
then
'Cause
that's
it's
just
so,
the
you
kind
had
of-
so many decisions that you
that's
made.
why it's
Yeah,
so
yeah.
complicated.
Right.
And so anything that makes that blacker or more opaque, that system
And-
is in my opinion, and I'm not even talking about performance, I think making a program
Yes.
more predictable, easier to debug, all those things
Yes.
is always a win because you're going to run out of time.
So there's an interesting subtle point there, which is that I think most people think garbage collection made programming easier. They think it decomplexifies it. And the truth of the matter is, it only makes it less complex if you never care about what actually happened. And the problem is, you always do. The game industry is such that when we ship things, it always comes down to hitting 30 frames a second, 60 frames a second. Mm-hmm. Nothing ever becomes irrelevant. Yeah. The strangest things will turn out to be stuff that you have to track down and fix. And I think that really does make it a little different from other types of programming, perhaps. Maybe people coming from like a web background, it's like, the server took 2 extra seconds to respond that time. It doesn't matter because your web's down half the time. Right. Otherwise, whatever. It's a much more, sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? A much more variant level of experience. Right. You're not expecting a web app to be 30 frames a second, always on, never miss, right? And so
you are expecting web servers not to have denial of service based on performance implications that you don't understand. So, like, I think it's wrong even in those cases.
But I'm just saying there's a lot, it's some web developers are thinking about those things. There's plenty of web developers who are just like, we're putting up a website, whatever, right? Mm-hmm. And you can see why, under those constraints, maybe you're not ever going to get to the part where you even ever thought about memory management. It doesn't even enter into your sphere of whatever, right? So just like everything leaks or who knows what it does, it doesn't, it just... So you say garbage collection or not, and it's not the same kind of thing. Yeah. But the problem with game development tends to be that even today, with today's hardware, a lot of games that you wouldn't even think it would matter, if they actually want to try and maintain a good frame rate, they actually have to care about a lot of these things, right? It's like just even a relatively simple 3D game ends up having a lot of these issues come to the front. Yep. And that kind of brings me to the second part about this topic with the native code, which is the performance sort of part of it. There's three parts that I was kind of thinking about. So the performance part. So one of the things that's interesting...
3 legs that are all weak and rickety.
Yes,
right? It's not like one weak leg. Right. Nope, this table's going down.
So one of the things about performance that I kind of feel like is a little pervasive is the concept that, it's almost like this sort of Americanized, abundance thing, like Horn of Plenty. It's like we have so much performance. Yeah. It's flowing all around us. Like
that drives me crazy.
We're tripping over performance and falling face first into more performance that's just around. It's like a Roman gala of performance.
Covered in performance.
We vomited performance into the performance vomitorium so that we go back and eat the more performance that was over there. And on one level, they're correct in the sense that I am actually sort of a relative newcomer on the scale of computing, in that, I was born in 1976. There are plenty of people who are still in the industry today who were programming games when I was born, right? So I'm not even one of the... But even I am old enough at this point to remember the first 5 megabyte hard drive we had, and, the fact that a 25 megahertz computer was this thing that was, insane when it happened. I was like, holy shit, they're so fast. Memory management units, all this stuff. So, obviously... Yeah, I look at stuff today and I'm like, holy shit, we have so much raw computing power. That's true. On the other hand, every last thing I use that isn't a game, because sometimes games are performant. Mm-hmm. Every last thing I use is way slower, way laggier than anything I used in 1986. Yeah. Games I ran in 1986, the OS I ran, the freaking Amiga operating system, was more respondent. Right. For a lot of operations than what I am given today on machines so many more times powerful, even for their relative resolution. So even for the amount of data that they're actually pushing around. Yeah. So the concept that we have more performance than we need is totally not true, because it's evident to me just even from the most trivial example. You pick up a phone, you swipe to the side, and it can't even keep up with your finger, despite having more power than things that ran at 60 frames a second at the same resolution. And
despite the fact that they do things like, we'll run the user interface at real-time priority to fix that. You're like, that's not what you
Right.
need to do.
Right.
You have other problems. That's what you need to fix.
There's nothing on the screen, dude. There's nothing on
Here,
the
let me
screen.
give you a clue.
You're
When they touch that, and you go through 10 levels of interpreted code
10?
to send the stupid
Try
thing
40.
to it's nuts. And the reason why that's actually kind of a hard thing, a lesson that I think is hard, it is hard to learn after the fact, instead of being the type of engineers who fight all along the way. All along the project of are you sure you should be doing that? Are you sure you should be doing a sprintf here? Right? That's just think about that for a second. Are you cool with that? Or is that cool?
Right.
Even little things like that. If you don't fight every little stage like that, then you get this accretion of little losses over time that are impossible to find.
Right.
They're not going to show up on a profile. They're just going to, it's all going to be everything's slow. It's no.
Right.
You just wrote a lot of slow shit that's compounded into this pile of slowness that didn't need to be there. It has to be the thing where you literally have to fight for it. And then Carmax talked about that when they wanted to hit 60. It was they needed things to test it. Yeah, they were we need to have systems in place so that if we miss, we're we need to know then, not 6 months. We're not going to test this when we're running at 30 and try to get to 60. That'll never work.
Yeah.
It has to be enforced along the way or you'll never, ever, ever make it. And that's true all the way across the board, but it's way worse in user interface stuff, which is running at 2 or 3 frames a second.
It's
and
crazy.
It's still horrible.
It's crazy. I don't know what goes on with those things. And it's it's so weird because you see them shipping more and more advanced phone hardware to try and get Facebook to run, and I'm just it's so embarrassing. It's that you could have run on a machine from 20 years ago at speed if you had the same kind of programming ethic that you did back then, but you don't. You have people who will shit intermediate languages and markup languages and parsers and shit, so that
and people
it's
complain,
this huge
and people are always
system,
wait, no, it's way more complicated than it is now.
It's
and
not.
Let's
not
just
true.
Lotus 123.
Right.
It's a spreadsheet.
Right.
It works pretty much exactly the same as Excel. There are graphical, you can change the font, some stuff like that. But the core engine of what that thing was doing was there in 1982, right? That was there, and it was tiny and small, and it was because they didn't have a choice. So there is something to be said for giving your developers shitty hardware, just forcing them to do that stuff, because it is just something that you have to fight.
Okay, so why has no one done that? They need to give developers the dev kit and lie to them, tell them this is the thing, and then you ship a faster
Oh, I see. Yeah. They did bump it up at the end. There is. Sony, the PSP ran at a slower megahertz than when they shipped. They bumped it up 30% and everyone got faster. But there's also developers that buy that stay on really low hardware, sometimes ridiculously low.
Interesting.
Especially the European developers tend to stay on. I mean, I had somebody that was they're on 2.0 gigahertz AMD chips, very old machines, and I'm that's awesome. You got to do that. Yeah. That's probably not the machine you want to do your modeling on.
Right.
But
it's don't boot through your studio on that.
Yeah,
that's
don't
not
run
a good
Premiere
idea.
on that.
Anything
that.
Idea.
But that said, in terms of writing gameplay, that's terrific. But no, the interpreted thing really bothers me in general anyway, because there's some win for interpreting stuff for very dynamic things. When you want to ship something to an end user who lets them customize, there's all the good reasons for that. None of those reasons apply to people writing apps that are going to ship on your phone from a pack file that they chose to install. There is no win to doing that because the languages are worse. There's no question. I can complain about C and C++ all day long. All day long.
Yeah.
But there is no way to say that shipping something in JavaScript is somehow more efficient development cycle than that. Especially because even for things like the
tools
awesome
are worse. The tools are just
I was just
going to
say, the funny thing is you're interpreted language, you could have debuggers that are in respect to the...
But
no,
they
don't even do that. They're worse.
Totally
so
terrible.
Most of the time, the embedded scripting language debugging is printf debugging. It's just logging the shit out of everything. And that's even crazier. So, because again, these are complicated shit, and I promise you, no matter what you think your code is doing, you're wrong. Like it is. It just is. It's complicated, and you might be wrong on very big, drastic levels, or you may be a little wrong in the way that, like, right, the backlink causes things to all that shit. You're just going to be surprised. And the concept that you're cool, even though you're shipping something onto hardware that you've written and tested for, that you're cool letting the runtime JIT affect what the end user is going to see is just insane.
Which, by the way, could change.
Yeah,
right?
It's gonna.
From when you shipped it.
It's gonna. And there's no win to be had there because you're not... I mean, if you were doing scripting, fine, put it in that. But like the thing for your core app is just nuts. And the idea a lot of time people talk about is like, well, it lets you run on future stuff.
Oh, you hit on the third thing that I was going to talk about there.
Let's talk about that because that's the one that is the weakest
argument.
argument.
That is the worst argument ever. Mm-hmm. So, to this day, I am unaware of a single time when that mindset has ever borne out in practice. Not one, right? Every time we are told that this is a write once, run anywhere thing, the exact opposite is true. It's the exact opposite is true. It's like, I don't care how simple it is. I don't care if it's CSS, like the simplest problem domain in the world, laying out something in 2D.
Right.
Totally fucked up.
Yep.
You have to test it across hundreds of browsers, and they will all be different, right? Mm-hmm. All the way down to something like Java, which is supposed to be specced out and whatever, you run it. It's like, nope, totally didn't work. Like, look at how Android was supposed to happen. Why do you choose Java? Oh, because we're going to virtualize across all these different hardware things. Totally didn't work. There's like lists. You go to the humble Android bundle, and they have lists of which phones will and won't run games in the bundle. It's like, this mentality doesn't work.
Right.
It never worked. The only thing that works with code, because like you said, code is incredibly complicated. The only thing that works with code is if you can test it on the things you ship it on.
Right. And guess what? That's what they did on the Humble Bundle page, is they went and tested all those devices.
Yes.
So if you did that, why didn't you write native?
Why
wasn't they able to write native code and just test that?
Which, I mean, to their credit, like I said, Android finally does have the NDK, so those games can just write native.
There's still, the Android is still a complete disaster.
It's still a complete disaster, yes.
I mean, that part, the nativeness of that is really hidden. You're still like a huge sections of the UI go through managed code. I mean, it's just, there's no evidence for it ever working. There's only pure faith that this time is the time.
Well, and there's plenty of evidence against it working, right?
Yeah.
There's tons of evidence that it does not work.
Yeah.
No evidence that it does work. And yet people still do things like choose an intermediate language.
Right.
Now, this goes exactly back to the garbage collection thing, right? Never enforce an intermediate language.
Right.
Provide the native language first, get that solid, ship a very solid native platform. I'm talking to you, Ouya, directly. Ship a solid native platform in which people write directly to the hardware.
What's funny is
then if you would like to provide an abstraction layer, you can provide the abstraction layer, and developers who would like to make a decision to save themselves the trouble of having to port it if they really believe that this will work, can write to that layer. There is no cost to you to separate those two things out, because at the end of the day, I guarantee you, the pipe dream that you have, that everyone writes to this and it magically works on all the hardware you ship in the future, is exactly that, a complete pipe dream. It has never happened.
So here's one other thing that's awesome about that, is you write this thing where you're like, oh, it'll let you run on all devices. Guess what? I do need to run on multiple devices. They're not all yours. So which means I've got
good point.
I've got a wrapper around my Objective-C. I've got a wrapper around my Java bindings. I've got a wrapper around my C# bullshit for Windows 8. It's like, you guys don't even get this. Before, I still had to write that in C, but at least I knew what the fuck was going on. Right. Now my wrapper is just this hand-wavy hope I get the messages quickly.
Right.
And I don't, right? And everybody has that problem. So it doesn't even make sense. And to make a big wrapper around some native interface, these native interfaces are there.
Right.
They don't somebody wrote those.
There is a
And then
CPU. It is executing,
and getting
shockingly,
interrupts.
much to Sun's dismay,
Yes.
not Java bytecode.
Yes.
Right? It is actually executing,
Custom compiled.
for those of you who like things like garbage collection, a thing called assembly language, right? It's ARM,
Right.
actually like executing machine code. And that is the thing that actually has to run at the end of the day.
Right.
You need access to that.
Right.
You have to be able to actually do that.
I guess so it doesn't make a lot of sense, and then you end up with this thing where like you had to write all those native interfaces for your wrapper and your garbage collection stuff to sit on top of anyway. So it's more work to provide this other stuff.
Yes.
Now the question with the Ouya, and I don't know this, and is maybe the NDK is technically Google's and the rest of it's free. I don't know. Maybe they can't.
Well,
ship
this
the
is
NDK.
why. So this is why I was asking. This is why I posted the question on Twitter.
Right.
Is because I wanted someone to, because I'm not going to spend a lot of time right now looking at the Ouya SDK.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not going to spend. I don't have a development project planned for this thing. I was trying to figure out how hard it would be to ship something on the platform, which, by the way, gets to the secret fourth leg of this whole thing that we haven't talked about yet. But so the secret fourth leg. So the thing with the SDK is I just noticed it's not in there, right? So I don't know, like maybe they do have an NDK that they're going to ship, or like I was hoping they would just say like, oh yeah, sorry, like we didn't have a chance to put that out yet,
right.
or you can just, or actually no, you just
Download
go
this other
download
thing.
go
Yeah.
go download Google's and it just works. Like I don't know, like they could say something, but nobody was answering,
Right.
and nobody seems to know in the community. I think there aren't that many people developing Ouya games.
Right.
I mean, it's the sad truth of it, right? But like, I couldn't get an answer to that question, and so I don't know. Maybe you're right. Maybe there is some very logical reason why they didn't provide it.
Or
want
maybe
some answer to that.
it's there somewhere and they just didn't document it. Who knows?
It doesn't look like it's in the pack that they have available, but I don't know.
Yeah.
So anyway, moving on to the mysterious fourth
leg.
The fourth leg of the well, actually, I guess should we move on to the fourth leg of the prong? I don't know. Maybe we don't want to move on to the fourth leg of the prong just yet.
No, give me
Have
the
we
fourth
covered
leg.
Have we covered everything that we want to cover? In the what was the
Well, I mean, I guess the point I would like to make to any platform developer is we already run on lots of devices. Anything you do to make it harder for me to do that and more layers for me to wrap the native stuff means more latency, more of it, and more work.
Right.
You're not saving me a damn thing.
Right.
Even if I run on Java, my Java app is not going to run on the Ouya Java app because there's going to be different
Right.
system APIs. It's like, just don't do that. Just give us, I need to run on a lot of things, which means it's going to be C++ and C. That's it.
Yeah.
That's all you need to do. Guess what? There's like GCC and Clang and LLVM just
Right.
waiting there. You
Yeah.
can already get them.
Right.
You can already do the whole thing. And guess what? Your own developers are developing those crappy wrappers using those.
Yes.
So just give us access to that. You'll be happier, you'll like the stuff, you'll get better games.
Right.
And I assume that's what you want.
Yeah.
You're not trying to, especially Ouya, who's like, they don't even have the argument where like, oh, we need that for security. It's like, no, they're trying to be open.
Yeah,
so
that's
like,
right. Yeah.
just let us write to the machine. We'll get way better use of that 1.5 fucking gigahertz
Yeah,
machine,
yeah,
which
right.
is insanely fucking fast.
Is that what it runs at?
Well, I mean, that's
It's a
what
Tegra
an
3,
Android
but-
now.
Okay.
Well, the Tegra, I think, is more like 1.2.
Well, I'm assuming
I
that
mean,
Tegra 3s
whatever
can
in
be
the
clocked differently. I'm assuming they're not all
it
clocked
may
the
not be
same.
clocked as
Because
fast
it's a
as
plugin.
the Surface.
It's a plug-in device, so it can be clocked differently and cooled differently, right? So I don't know. But I don't know much about Tegra 3. I haven't shipped software for Tegra 3
The
yet.
Tegra 3 is not great.
So anyway, yeah. Well, that's what I've heard. But, so the secret fourth leg, right, is existing code. So one of the things that people I don't think appreciate about games is all of the high-profile game developers, like the people that you actually want to lead the charge because they have the most press visibility, right? You know, you're talking about your Activisions, your Electronic Arts, your whatever, you know, these sort of the big guys, and also the, you know, maybe the smaller big guys like the Valve or something, the people who aren't necessarily publicly traded companies but still control a huge segment of the industry and make all the games and whatever, Bungie, etc. These people have invested, they have a large number of highly paid, highly skilled engineers who are writing C and C++, maybe a little assembly code, all the time. They have built up huge libraries of code that they rely on to ship games in a timely fashion. If you come in and say, hey, guess what, guys? You get to do all that in Java now, right? Or, oh, we kind of have a thing that compiles C, but it compiles it to the CLR thing, so hey, I hope you don't mind that all your stuff will run differently now, and it's a little, you know, wacky and whatever. That is putting such a huge headwind you know, in front of them that they have to compensate for, right? There is a huge body of work that exists for native code, for the ability to compile directly, you know, a C code base into a directly executable thing. You need to capitalize on that, right? It's like a backwards compatibility argument. The thing that you want to be backwards compatibility with is not the Java virtual machine, because basically you're talking about Minecraft. Like the one game you care about that's ever been written in Java, that's it. That's all we've got, right? It's like every other game that anyone's ever cared about, all the other multi-million-dollar franchises, all the other everything, they were all written in C. And most of these places are engines that have evolved over time. They don't get rewritten every time.
Yeah, and they don't even know how they work. I mean, those people leave the company.
It's possibly
It's hard enough. I just want to.
That's possibly true. We don't know who wrote the vector code. It's just what we use.
Right.
And so don't fight that. Embrace that. C is a lingua franca. Provide the ability to show up to your platform, compile with GCC or Clang or something, direct to your machine, spec your video stuff very cleanly with an OpenGL, whatever. Just make it be what people understand, and you'll get the games because it won't take any work to ship them.
The easiest thing I would say to anybody making a platform is ship with LLVM or Clang or GCC. People are used to it. Don't force me to use Cygwin or anything else. It's got to run under Windows natively. Give me a reasonable debugger. It doesn't have to be a good one, but I have to be able to connect to the machine. Don't make me like sign shit to debug. Don't make just. I should be able to, given an app, be able to start stepping. Give me that. And then there was one more important thing. And like even the pressure. Oh, and then the other thing is, don't make me use some custom thing just to get started. Like right. Don't expect me to have to go in there and look at your framework to untangle it into something that I can use. Like there should be a simple loop that just draws a triangle in GL. It should be one self-contained thing. If you can compile that, I can get a game working. I can get any of our middleware working in days, and I will do it. Everyone will do it. But if any one of those other things happen, then it's like, how many is it really going to ship? Well, then you start going in all those calculus, and then you're like, you've already lost, like, because you're not going to ship as many. But fixing those small little things is all that you need to do. And they're not hard. This is all very small.
And it should be minimal, right? It's like, there's some things I need, right? I need to be able to get the input. I need to get the HID device inputs, right, from your whatever your input chain is. I need to be able to, like, you know, manage the push buffer to the graphics system and the memory there, right, whatever. I need to be able to
start a looping sound.
Start sounds, like have a sound output stream. I need to be able to get the clock, high precision timers. You know, I need these things. They should roughly be exactly what that is. There should be like a call that says, get high precision timer, and it returns the high precision timer. That's it, right? There's no class. There's no like initialize the high precision timer subsystem that has like this huge set of like clock classes. No, there should just be one function that does that, right? And the closer you get to just one function that does exactly whatever the thing is that needs to be done, that is what you want. Because like you said, everyone has to abstract these, right? Everyone has their own set of ways that they handle the cross-platformness. So we don't want, need, or even like when we are presented with your framework, because all we're going to have now is a problem of having to do this with the two frameworks.
And worst case, you end up with something like Windows 8 that abstracts thread differently than literally every other platform. And so then you're like...
It screws everything. It makes us have to rewrite our framework. It's like you want the minimum possible thing that exposes the capabilities of the hardware. That is what you actually want.
And it's funny because that is actually just way easier. The other thing is... like
it's easier for everybody.
And the frustrating thing...
And people who don't understand that, if you're people who are making products who don't have that level of understanding to be able to use those, there is, first of all, you can always provide libs to those people. They can have a level that sits on top of it. But you don't even have to really worry about that, because that's like what Rad can do. Like companies can step in and fill that void for you until you do it, or you don't ever have to do it. People, it's a capitalist system. If there's things that are too hard for people, that's what the Unreal Engine's for. That's what Unity's for. They can go purchase solutions by people who knew the problem domain and who can do specifically.
But if you make it really hard to get Unreal running on your hardware, then you may not get it.
You may never get Unreal. There may never be an Unreal Ouya because they're just like, fuck it, I want to rewrite this thing in Java.
Right.
Which I'm guessing they probably
don't. And
don't.
the only other funny thing is Apple did non-native, and they didn't take off till they did native.
Wait, what are you talking about? Apple did native right off the bat.
No. Everyone forgets that. The first iPhone was not native programming. It was not native programming. Everyone forgets that. It was 6 months in where they were like, now you can write native apps.
Really?
Before it was going to be all HTML5 and bullshit like that. Like,
what?
Yes. The first version of the Apple had no native. That's important to remember.
I don't believe you.
Nobody remembers this.
You're right, including me.
Yeah, it was non-native to begin with. Then they shipped native apps.
I don't believe you.
Android, same thing. They came out with Java first, and all you had, and not only in terms of number of apps.
I'm not willing to go past this yet. So here's what I remember. I remember Steve Jobs getting up to announce the fact that now third parties could ship apps for the iPhone.
Yep.
And he showed like Spore, light, some kind of Spore thing from EA. EA got up and said, we were able to get this running in no time. Wasn't that the first time?
No, that was not the first.
Okay, so there was before
6
that.
months.
Who was allowed to ship before?
6 months before that.
Who could ship before that?
Apple. And you could ship. They were like, the whole point of this is we have a good JIT, we have everything, just make web pages. And then they didn't have, remember, they didn't even have a third-party app store.
I see what you're saying. So you're talking about before apps existed at all. You're saying what they were telling you to do is just use the web browser.
Yeah, you can do that.
Sure. Absolutely.
The problem was is they didn't have it. They're like, there's no advantage to native. And then
I didn't remember that part.
Then they changed the whole thing. And then Android, same thing. Everything was Java at first.
Right.
Hey, you got apps. They're all shitty and gross and nobody likes them. Then they do native. Windows. A company that has understood the value of API lock-in for 30 years.
Suddenly it gets amnesia.
Suddenly goes, let me do that. And then 2 years later, oops, okay, now you're getting native. My bad. I mean, they're very apologetic about all this.
Right.
And then you can't keep making these same mistakes. Start with native. Add the bullshit later.
Right.
You totally can add the bullshit later.
Right.
No one's going to care.
No,
the apps are going to totally be better.
Yeah.
Right. Facebook's come out and said it was a huge mistake.
HTML5, yes.
When we focused a lot of our development for 3 years on just HTML5.
They said that was a disaster.
And then they were like, that was a disaster. Now we embrace native and it's only better.
Yeah.
Anyway, it is just silly. I mean, this goes into... you want to segue this podcast into the insanity of the Chromium stuff?
So let's wrap it up for today, for this one, and then we'll do that one.
So this is basically a direct plea to Ouya now.
So to wrap up that very long and rambling discussion, which is, to be fair, what I wanted. I just wanted to get everything on the table, because we can write, an article later that's distilled down. Here's the quick, high-level brief. But yes, this is a direct plea, not just to Ouya, but to everyone who ships a platform who maybe has a little bit of an open agenda. To anyone who's shipping a hardware platform that I care about succeeding in the future. Just please do this, because it is so easy to support a platform that comes out with well-spec'd hardware, C compilation direct to something you can control, and nothing else in the way. You can do magic there. Magic is possible there.
Right.
And all this shit you put on top is just weighting you down. You're the hot air balloon that's got anvils tied around. You're like, what did you put this Java-shaped anvil on here for? It's let your thing go, let it fly.
So should we talk about asm.js later then? I think we need a whole. I need an entire
end that one
podcast to talk about.
I think we got out what I was trying to say, what I wanted us to talk about, And so
Ouya.
we'll save it from everything else. So Ouya, please just make a native thing. Maybe it's too late. Like maybe the ship has sailed. I don't know. Like maybe you can't recover.
Well,
because
it's sunk.
well,
The
you
ship
know
is-
what's
maybe the
interesting?
ship is sunk.
One of the interesting things about it, right, is like what are the first reviews of Ouya that came out? They were like, it's laggy. They're like, the controller feels laggy. The frame rate feels laggy. They're talking about, like, performance was the first thing they commented on. Now, that may have nothing to do with the Java part. That may have been because, like, hardware problems. I don't know what the cause was. But the point there...
I'm not ruling out Java.
Right, it's probably Java. But I'm saying the point there is it matters.
Yeah.
You cannot, like, every little thing that you might introduce that can cause glitches, that can cause lags, that can cause you to miss a frame, that makes it so that you see the stutter. That is what turns it from this kind of magical, like, glassy, beautiful experience, like really tactile, really feedback-oriented, into fucking Xbox with the Dorito ad, where you're like, you try to go to the next Dorito ad and, like, the fucking flash for, like, Mountain Dew hasn't loaded yet, so it can't, like, get it's like the Mountain Dew, right? And then the Dew comes up for Reddit, right? And you're like, that just, it makes you, it steps you out of that into this whole other world where you realize you're just running this shit platform with just crap, like, everywhere. It's just like, it's all just shoved together and no one cared, and it's like, so you want to get away from that, because people, like, game reviewers care about this stuff. They do, right? You know, and players care about this stuff.
I think it's also something that, like, most people pick up on without being able to really identify why. They're just like, this feels magic, and it doesn't.
In fact, that's the iPhone.
Yeah.
That was what the iPhone was. For the first time, the iPhone actually, compared to other smartphones, had crazy good performance. They were way better. So you picked it up and you touched that screen,
Which
and
has
it was
just
like
gotten
perfect,
slower and laggier
right?
and laggier.
It's gotten slower and laggier, right? That's John Blow's thing. He's always talking about, like, how his first iPhone was great, and it's like it keeps getting worse. Yeah. But that's the thing, is that even though people are not really able to articulate to you what's bad about the phone when they get the laggy phone. Like, they've got the laggy phone, and like, I don't know, it's a smartphone, whatever. They may not even mention it. They don't even think about it, whatever. But you give them that phone where someone did everything right. And it's like, wow.
Right.
They knew. It's like they know immediately that feeling, and that's the same thing is true for when you pick up that controller. When if it's super responsive to you and everything's perfectly smooth, it's this whole level that you go to that is just, as soon as you insert this crap in there, that every so often it's glitchy. Well, it totally breaks. It totally breaks the immersion. It's like a magic trick where you saw the card, you saw the guy do the card, right? It's like
I will just say this
breaks
as well.
you.
As soon as we have Oculuses and you're playing an Oculus game,
it's vomit.
If you
vomit is now, it's now the downside.
Instead of being loggy, you're making your players, your customers sick.
Yeah.
So, like,
that's true.
We do have a new level, and in fact, they have done all the tests at Valve, and they're like, we need to get to 10 milliseconds.
Right.
Forget 60 hertz. We need to be 100 hertz before it feels really tight.
Yep, I believe that.
So, yeah, we just need to fight this fight all the time. All the time.
So that's it. So to summarize, yes, please change the way we are thinking about this. It really does matter, not just to, like, old school curmudgeonly people. The results matter, and you can't go around inserting this kind of cruft. It has to be bare metal. You want to put the cruft on top, gotta be optional. Yeah. That is my plea.
And basically, this podcast has been like an hour to say this, so we've got some cruft as well to work on.
Don't follow this podcast model when you are making your operating system.
Just follow our advice.
Do what we say, not what we do.
Right.
Because
like
we have inserted all of the cruft. We're a Java VM. This podcast. We're like meta executing all.
We're
gonna
stop, and then it just totally garbage
collects. Yeah.
Right.
All right.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next week.